She got pregnant in 10th grade, and her parents kicked her out of the house. 20 years later, they decided to visit their daughter and grandson, but what they saw shocked them. Emily Sanders had always been the perfect daughter, at least in the eyes of her parents. Living in a quiet suburb of Des Moines, Iowa, she followed every rule that Mark and Linda Sanders set. They were deeply religious, rigid in their beliefs, and unwavering in their expectations. Church every Sunday was mandatory, curfews were not to be negotiated, and discussions about boys were strictly off-limits. Emily was expected to be an example of purity and obedience, a reflection of their values to the world. At 15, Emily was quiet, thoughtful, and carried a soft elegance about her. Her long brown hair was always neatly braided, her grades were among the best in her class, and she rarely spoke out of turn. From the outside, the Sanders family looked flawless. But inside their home, warmth was conditional, and love came only when rules were followed to the letter. Any sign of rebellion, no matter how small, was met with coldness, or worse, punishment. It was during her sophomore year of high school that everything began to crumble. One chilly November afternoon, Emily sat in the nurse's office, her hands trembling as she waited for the results of a test that would change her life. When the nurse returned with solemn eyes and handed her a paper, the truth hit her with the force of a train. She was pregnant. The father was Daniel, a senior who had charmed her with soft words and an easy smile. Their relationship had been brief and hidden, one of stolen moments and whispered promises. But when Emily told him about the baby, Daniel disappeared. He stopped answering her calls, unfollowed her on social media, and avoided her at school like she had never existed. The betrayal was sharp, but not as painful as what came next. 2 days later, Emily sat across the dinner table from her parents, the words caught in her throat. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed felt like it stretched across centuries. Mark stared at her as if she had spoken in tongues. Linda dropped her fork. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the shouting. Mark's voice thundered through the house, full of rage and disappointment. "You've brought shame into this family. Do you realize what you've done?" Linda, crying, muttered prayers under her breath, blaming Emily's sin on modern influences and the devil's temptations. They demanded to know who the boy was. When Emily couldn't answer, the disgust in their eyes only deepened. In their world, premarital pregnancy was not just a mistake, it was a moral catastrophe. Emily had become, in their eyes, the embodiment of failure. No matter how many tears she shed, no matter how much she begged for them to listen, their decision came swiftly and mercilessly. They gave her a week to leave the house. A week to find somewhere else to go. No support. No help. Just a packed backpack and a Bible placed on top, as if that would somehow undo what had been done. On her last night in the house, Emily sat on the floor of her bedroom, staring at the walls she had grown up with. The posters of books she loved, the photos from middle school, the stuffed bear she had slept with as a child, none of it felt like hers anymore. Her body was changing. Her life was unraveling. And the people who had promised to love her, no matter what, had turned their backs. At dawn, she walked out the front door with silent steps, not daring to look back. The air was cold, her breath visible with each exhale, and her fingers clutched the straps of her worn-out backpack. She had no plan, no money, and nowhere to go. But she had one thing left: resolve. Her parents had thrown her into a world she wasn't ready for. But if they thought she would disappear, they were wrong. Deep in the pit of her despair, something else was beginning to grow, a fire, faint but fierce. She was terrified, yes. But she wasn't going to let this be the end of her story. Because sometimes, it is in the moments of absolute rejection that the seeds of transformation are planted. The Greyhound bus rolled into downtown Chicago just after 10 o'clock at night. The city was alive in a way Emily had never seen before. Neon lights flickered against the dark windows of skyscrapers, the sound of traffic and voices echoed through the streets, and the air was thick with a mix of exhaust and street food. She stepped off the bus with the same backpack she'd left Des Moines with, clutching it tightly like a lifeline. Her coat was too thin for the biting wind, and her sneakers soaked through from the slush on the sidewalk. She stood there for a few minutes, disoriented. The bus terminal was crowded, filled with travelers who moved quickly and with purpose, people who had places to be and someone waiting for them. Emily had neither.
She was 16, pregnant, and alone in a city of over 2 million strangers. Her first night was spent inside the terminal, curled on a hot plastic bench, using her backpack as a pillow and her arms as a blanket. She kept one eye open, nervous each time someone walked past her. No one looked her way. In a city that large, anonymity came easily. No one asked questions, no one offered help. The next morning, she wondered. With only $32 in her pocket, she bought a muffin and a bottle of water from a convenience store. Then she walked until her feet ached, asking people for directions to any shelter that might take her in. The responses were vague, and more than one person warned her how dangerous it was to be out alone. By evening, she found herself in front of a crowded community center in South Chicago. A line had already formed outside, mostly women with children or weathered men with hollow faces. Emily stood quietly at the back of the line, unsure if she even belonged there. When she reached the front, a tired-looking woman at the reception desk glanced at her belly and frowned. "How far along are you?" "Almost 5 months, I think," Emily answered. The woman nodded. "We have a few beds in the women's dorm, but only for the night. You'll need to talk to social services tomorrow morning." That night, she lay in a bunk bed surrounded by strangers, the distant cries of babies and the quiet murmurs of broken conversations creating a constant hum in the background. Emily didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and ran her fingers gently over the small curve of her stomach. The baby moved occasionally, a strange but oddly comforting flutter that reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. Over the next few weeks, Emily drifted between shelters, trying to stay warm, safe, and fed. Some nights were easier than others. In one shelter, a woman named Tanya showed her how to apply for food assistance and pointed her to a local clinic that offered prenatal care for free. The staff at the clinic were kind, but the process was slow, the waiting rooms always full. Still, it gave Emily a place to go, a reason to get out of bed. Her life settled into a fragile routine. Mornings at the clinic, afternoons at the library reading pregnancy books, evenings back in line at one of the city's temporary shelters. She tried not to think too far ahead, one day at a time was all she could handle. It was at the clinic that she met Carol. Carol was in her early 60s, a retired nurse with silver hair pulled back into a bun and a voice that carried quiet authority. She volunteered at the clinic twice a week, mostly helping with paperwork and providing comfort to anxious young mothers. One afternoon, as Emily waited for her appointment, Carol noticed her reading a worn-out copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting. "You're reading that upside down, dear," Carol said, gently placing a hand on the back of the chair next to her. Emily quickly turned the book around and flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't sleep last night. It is hard to focus," Carol said beside her, studying her face. "How far along?" 22 weeks now, I think." "You're young," Carol said without judgment, just a quiet observation. "And very alone, I imagine." Emily nodded, unsure what to say. They talked for nearly an hour that day. Carol asked questions, not the invasive, pitying kind, but practical ones. Had she considered applying for long-term housing programs? Was she getting enough iron? Did she know what to expect during labor? Emily found herself answering honestly, drawn in by Carol's calm presence. There was something comforting in the way she listened, not like a social worker ticking boxes, but like someone who genuinely cared. A week later, as Emily stood in line outside another shelter, she heard someone call her name. She turned and saw Carol waving from across the street. "I was hoping I'd find you," Carol said, crossing the street. "Come with me." Emily hesitated. "Where?" Carol gave her a kind smile. "To my house. Just for a few nights. You don't have to stay. But I hate the thought of you out here in the cold." It was the first real offer of help Emily had received in weeks. She followed. Carol lived in a small townhouse on the west side of the city. It was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of lavender. Amalia's room had soft pillows, a warm blanket, and a window that overlooked a quiet street. That night, for the first time since Sasha Day arrived in Chicago, she slept without fear. The next morning, Carol made pancakes and set 2 plates on the table. "House rules are simple," she said. "No lies, no late nights, and if you're staying, you help out." Emily nodded. "I can clean. And I like organizing things." Carol smiled. "Perfect." Over the following weeks, Emily regained a part of herself she hadn't realized was missing.
She cleaned the house, helped Carol organize medical files she still kept from her years at the hospital, and read every book on childbirth and parenting she could get her hands on. Carol took her to her prenatal checkups and even helped her register for a GED program. Slowly, Emily began to imagine a future, not just surviving, but building something new. They rarely talked about the past. Carol never asked about Emily's family, and Emily didn't offer details. What mattered was now. Late one night, as they folded laundry together, Carol looked at her with a seriousness that made Emily pause. "You remind me of my daughter," she said. Emily looked up. "You have a daughter?" Carol nodded slowly. "Had. She passed away 10 years ago. Car accident. She was about your age when she left home, full of fire and mistakes." "I'm sorry," Emily said, her voice soft. Carol shook her head. "You don't need to be. You being here, it's good. For both of us." They didn't say anything more that night, but something shifted between them. The bond deepened, not as mother and daughter, but as 2 women piecing their lives back together from very different kinds of loss. But life, as Emily had learned too many times already, didn't offer peace for long. One morning, Carol didn't come down for breakfast. Emily found her in bed, pale and sweating, her breathing shallow. She called an ambulance and rode with her to the hospital. The doctors ran tests and admitted Carol immediately. She had a severe infection, complicated by an undiagnosed autoimmune condition. The treatment would be long and unpredictable. Just like that, the ground beneath Emily's feet shifted again. With Carol in the hospital and no relatives to contact, Emily was told she couldn't remain in the townhouse. The property would be locked until Carol could return, or until other legal arrangements were made. Emily stood on the porch, holding her backpack and a small duffel Carol had packed for her, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched the front door close. She was back where she had started. Alone. Pregnant. Homeless. But this time, something was different. She knew where to go. She had contacts. She had a plan, however shaky. She wasn't the same scared girl who had stepped off that bus weeks ago. She was still in the storm, but now, she had learned how to swim. Emily's world had narrowed to a single focus, preparing for the birth of her child. With Carol hospitalized indefinitely and her time at the townhouse over, Emily entered the city's transitional housing program for young mothers. It wasn't ideal, 4 bunk beds to a room, a strict curfew, and meals served on a rotating schedule, but it was safe, and for now, that was enough. she was placed at the Anderson shelter on the south side, a renovated school building turned into temporary housing for teen mothers and pregnant girls. The walls were pale yellow, and the air always carried the scent of oatmeal and industrial-strength disinfectant. Emily shared a room with 2 other girls, one of whom was already caring for a newborn. Cries echoed through the hallways at all hours, and the staff moved with the weary pace of people stretched too thin. But there was something comforting in the chaos. For the first time, Emily wasn't the only girl in her situation. There were others who had faced abandonment, betrayal, fear. They traded advice about formula brands, shared prenatal vitamins, and whispered stories about the boys who'd left them behind. Emily kept to herself at first, but over time, she found companionship in a girl named Mariah, a sharp-tongued 17-year-old from Detroit who wore her pain like armor. "You always look like you're thinking about something sad," Mariah said one night as they folded donated baby clothes. "I guess I'm always thinking about everything," Emily replied. Mariah shrugged. "Well, you're about to have a kid. You're allowed to think too much. Just don't let it break you." It became a kind of unspoken alliance between them. They weren't best friends, but they kept each other grounded. Emily's due date approached quickly. The final trimester was the hardest yet. Her back ached constantly, sleep was nearly impossible, and even the simplest tasks left her breathless. But she stayed committed to the routine, daily walks, prenatal classes hosted by shelter volunteers, and quiet moments journaling late at night. She'd picked the name weeks ago. Noah. It had come to her one morning while reading a pamphlet on baby names. It meant rest or comfort, something she hoped he would find in a world that had offered her so little of either. At 38 weeks, the contractions began. She recognized them instantly, sharp, rhythmic, and relentless. A staff member drove her to the hospital, where she was admitted quickly. The nurses were kind, but the delivery was brutal. Emily labored for over 15 hours.
Her screams echoed down sterile hallways, her fingers clenched tightly around the braille. There was no one to hold her hand. No family in the waiting room. No father pacing nervously with flowers. Just Emily and the sharp, grinding pain of bringing life into a world that had tried so hard to break her. But then, at 6:23 in the morning, a cry filled the delivery room, a single, piercing wail that cut through the exhaustion and pain like sunlight through storm clouds. Her son was born. The nurse laid the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest, and Emily stared down into a face that was impossibly small and impossibly perfect. His skin was flushed and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut, and his fists curled tightly beneath his chin. "Noah," she whispered, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You're here." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the absence of her parents. Not the boy who had vanished. Not the nice on-concrete floors or the strangers' stairs in the shelter dining hall. All of it faded beneath the weight of the tiny body resting against hers. The hospital kept her for 3 days. During that time, Emily barely slept. She stared at Noah constantly, learning every detail of his face, the way he breathed, the small sounds he made as he dreamed. The nurses taught her how to bathe him, how to swallow him tightly, how to recognize signs of hunger or discomfort. She listened to every instruction like it was a sacred text. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. When they returned to the shelter, things changed. The other girls became softer around her. One offered to do her laundry. Another gave her extra baby wipes. Even the staff, usually brisk and overworked, spoke to her with more gentleness. Emily sensed that there was a quiet recognition in the way they looked at her now, a kind of respect. She was no longer a pregnant girl in limbo. She was a mother. But motherhood at the shelter was grueling. Diapers were rationed. Formula was expensive, and breastfeeding came with its own set of complications. Noah cried often in the early weeks, inconsolable sobs that left Emily feeling helpless. She walked him through the hall that night, bouncing gently, whispering lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. There were moments of desperation. Nights when she hadn't eaten all day because the food ran out early. Mornings when she had to decide whether to use her last few dollars on baby supplies or bus fare to her get classes. More than once, she skipped meals entirely, given everything she had to ensure Noah was fed and warm. Still, she pressed on. Carol's name was still listed as her emergency contact. Emily called the hospital once a week, checking on her condition. The answers were always vague. Stable, but not improving. Still under observation. Still not ready for visitors. Each time, Emily hung up feeling heavier. One afternoon, sorting through the mail pile at the shelter, she came across an envelope with her name scrawled across it in familiar handwriting. Inside was a card from Carol, written in shaky script. Emily, I think about you and Noah every day. I am proud of you, even if I can't be there right now. There's a folder in my desk drawer at home, top right corner. Open it when you can. I left something for you. Emily read the message 3 times before placing it carefully inside a shoebox where she kept her most important belongings. She didn't get the chance to return to Carol's house until 2 weeks later. A shelter volunteer agreed to watch Noah for the afternoon while Emily took a train to the west side. The house was quiet when she arrived, dust collecting on the porch. She still had the key. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered, down to the lavender scent still lingering in the hallway. She walked into Carol's bedroom and found the desk. The top drawer creaked as she opened it, revealing the folder just as described. Inside were several papers, medical forms, photographs, and, at the bottom, a letter of recommendation. It was dated months earlier, addressed to a local technical college. To whom it may concern. I am writing on behalf of Emily Sanders, a woman of rare resilience and integrity. Though she has faced unimaginable hardship, she has done so with courage and grace. I wholeheartedly recommend her for any scholarship or training opportunity you can provide. She is capable, determined, and will make an excellent nurse one day. Sincerely, Carol B. Tanner, RN, retired. Beneath the letter was a brochure for a vocational program in nursing, complete with a list of scholarship requirements. One of them, letters of recommendation. Another, a statement of purpose. Emily sat on the edge of Carol's bed, the letter trembling in her hands. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more daunting. The program's next application deadline was in 3 weeks. She would need to find childcare for Noah, write an essay, and somehow gather documents from a life she had long been forced to leave behind. But she also knew something else. She could do it. She had survived the unthinkable, brought a life into the world, and kept going when every door had slammed shut. Carol believed in her. Mariah had said she had the kind of fight most people couldn't fake. And now, she had a chance to turn that fight into a future. When she returned to the shelter that night, she watched Noah sleeping beside her and whispered softly, I am going to do this. For you. For me. For everything we were lost, and everything we still have to build. The path forward would not be easy. But it was finally clear. Emily sat cross-legged on the cold tile floor of the shelter's common area, A printed nursing program brochure spread open in front of her and a worn notebook balanced on her knee. Noe, now 3 months old, lay in a bassinet beside her, cooing softly as he waved his small hands in the air. Her pen hovered over the blank page meant to contain her application essay, but her mind was far from calm. The scholarship deadline was 10 days away. She had managed to secure a letter from a staff supervisor at the shelter to supplement Carol's recommendation, and ESA had scraped together enough documents to verify her current living situation. What remained was the essay, and proof that she could find stable childcare while attending classes. That was where things began to unravel. Emily had approached the shelter director about help with subsidized daycare. The answer had been sympathetic but firm. The city's child assistance funds were already stretched, and the waitlist for free daycare for infants was more than 6 months long. Without a guaranteed spot, the technical college couldn't confirm her eligibility for the scholarship. She spent the next 3 days calling every facility listed in the city's resource guide. Most never answered. The ones that did offered cold refusals, no room for infants, no scholarships, no flexibility. Her voice, calm at first, turned shaky with each new rejection. Noe sensed her stress, crying more than usual, which only made it harder to focus. On the 4th day, Emily walked 2 miles in the snow with Noe bundled tightly against her chest, desperate to meet with a counselor at a local family resource center. The woman at the front desk glanced at her baby and sighed. "Honey, I wish I could help, but even if we get you approved, it won't be fast. You're going to need someone to watch your baby in the meantime." Emily clenched her jaw. "I don't have anyone. No family, no friends who can do that." "Well then," the woman said gently, "you might need to postpone school until he is older." Those words clanged in Amalia's ears like a gavel striking down hope. She walked out without saying goodbye, the cold air making her eyes sting, not from the wind, but from the pressure of unshed tears. Postpone school. Wait. Let another opportunity pass. That had been the pattern since Esa had arrived in Chicago, since the moment Esa had been cast out. Always waiting, always surviving, never progressing. Back at the shelter, Emily sat silently through dinner. Mariah noticed. "You get bad news or something?" she asked between spoonfuls of rice and beans. "I can't get childcare in time. I might lose the scholarship." Mariah chewed slowly, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "What if I watch him?" Emily blinked. "You?" Mariah nodded. "I am not going to that damn get class again this month. The volunteer lady there always looks at me like I am stupid. I can't stay back. I am good with babies." Emily hesitated. Mariah was unpredictable, moody, something sarcastic to the point of cruelty, but she was also fiercely loyal once you got past the jagged edges. And more importantly, she had taken care of her younger siblings most of her life. She knew what she was doing. "You'd really do that?" Emily asked. Mariah shrugged. "You helped me when I needed diapers. This makes us even." That night, Emily wrote her application essay by flashlight, Noe asleep beside her and Mariah humming an off-key lullaby from the bunk below. Her words poured out, not dramatic, not embellished, just honest. She wrote about the night she gave birth alone, about Carol's kindness, about the helplessness she had felt walking through the snow with nowhere to go. But most of all, she wrote about what she wanted to become. "I want to be the person I needed when I was scared and broken. I want to help other girls who feel like their world has ended realize that they can still begin again. She submitted the application 2 days later. But the waiting was brutal. Each day brought a new hurdle. Noe developed a stubborn cough that had her rushed to the clinic, where she spent 3 hours in a packed waiting room only to be told it was a minor infection. The shelter's heating system failed for a weekend, forcing everyone into the overcrowded dining hall with their children bundled in layers. And Mariah, true to her word, watched Noe, but with a level of detachment that made Emily constantly anxious. The tension reached a breaking point one evening when Emily returned from a workshop at the college to find Noe crying unattended in their room. "Where were you?" Emily snapped, her voice trembling with panic as she scooped her son into her arms. "I went to grab food." "He was fine," Mariah said, arms crossed, eyes defiant. "You left him alone." "It was 5 minutes. I don't care if it was 30 seconds. The room went silent. The air thickened between them. Mariah stood, grabbed her coat, and muttered, "Next time, find someone else," before walking out. Emily sank onto the bed, holding Noe close, guilt and exhaustion mixing into something sharp in her chest. She had asked too much of someone who was also barely hanging on. She was trying to build a future, but the present kept swallowing her whole. 3 more days passed without word from the college. Emily avoided Mariah, keeping to herself, balancing Noe on her lap as she studied pediatric flashcards borrowed from the shelter's tiny bookshelf. Her sleep was shallow and fragmented, dreams haunted by missed deadlines and closing doors. Then, finally, on a Wednesday morning, the email came. Her application had been accepted. She had received the scholarship. The message included a schedule for orientation and class dates, along with information about a program for on-site childcare. The college had partnered with a local church to offer temporary care for students with infants. It was not permanent, but it would cover the first semester. Emily stared at the screen, unable to move. Then she cried, deep, silent tears that slipped down her cheeks and soaked the color of her shirt. She clutched Noe gently, whispering over and over, "We did it." But there was little time for celebration. Orientation was in less than a week. She needed supplies, transportation, and a better routine. Emily spent the next days organizing everything. She met with a student advisor who was impressed by her tenacity and agreed to help her apply for additional support grants. She located the church offering childcare and arranged a visit. It was modest but clean, staffed by older women who could at Noe and reassured her that he would be in good hands. The night before orientation, Emily stood by the shelter window, watching snow fall under a street lamp. Mariah approached quietly. "You mad at me?" she asked, eyes forward. "No," Emily replied, after a pause. "I was scared." "That's all." Mariah nodded. "Me too." They didn't say anything else, but as Mariah walked away, Emily felt something settle inside her, not peace exactly, but understanding. None of them were perfect. They were surviving, one fractured day at a time. On the morning of orientation, Emily dressed in her cleanest clothes, bundled Noe into layers, and stepped out into the freezing wind. She was still afraid. She still had no safety net. But now, for the first time, she was walking toward something, not running from it. The building that housed the nursing program stood tall and grey against the winter sky. Inside, the halls buzzed with students. Emily sat quietly through the introductory session, clutching a folder of documents and listening to the director talk about the importance of resilience in the medical field. "You'll be tested," he said. "But those who come through it stronger are the ones who make the best nurses." Emily believed that. Because the test had already begun. And she was still standing. The first week of classes was a whirlwind. Emily sat at the back of the room each day, a small spiral notebook open on her desk, a second-hand textbook on her lap, and her mind constantly shifting between blood pressure protocols and whether Noah was doing well at the church daycare. Her classmates were mostly older, a few of them already parents, though none as young as her. No one asked her many questions. She liked it that way. The school environment, though demanding, brought a kind of focus she hadn't felt in years. For a few hours each day, she wasn't just a homeless teen mother or a girl abandoned by her family, she was a student, a woman with a purpose. She soaked in everything: anatomy terms, patient interaction techniques, the sterile procedures required for clean hospital work. Her favorite class quickly became the hands-on lab, where she practiced inserting IVs into dummies and learned the correct posture for lifting patients. Every night, after classes ended, she returned to the shelter and picked up Noah. He would reach for her with small fingers and a tired grin, and as she'd hold him close, murmuring stories about everything she was learning. He wouldn't understand any of it for years, but she hoped that someday he would know the sacrifices made for each step forward. Her schedule left little room for rest. Mornings began before sunrise, packing bottles and extra clothes into Noah's diaper bag. The shelter kitchen opened at 6, offering lukewarm oatmeal and sometimes a banana, which she often saved for lunch. The train ride to campus was 40 minutes, sometimes longer when the weather turned ugly. But none of it stopped her. She had fallen into rhythm with her struggle, and that rhythm kept her going. Then, one evening, her world shifted again, quietly, unexpectedly, with the discovery of a second envelope from Carol. It had arrived at the shelter that afternoon, passed to her by a staff member who found it in the administrative office's mail pile. Unlike Carol's earlier message, this envelope was thick, sealed tightly with tape. Emily waited until she was in her room, Noah already asleep, before opening it. Inside were three things: a handwritten note, a faded photograph of Carol in a hospital uniform standing beside a patient, and a legal-looking document clipped to a letterhead that read "City Health Services, Retired Personnel Records." The note was short, written in Carol's steady, if slightly slanted, cursive. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you found the recommendation and made your move. I always knew you would. Enclosed is something I meant to give you much earlier, but life got in the way. This belongs to you now. Use it well. Love always, Carol." Emily unfolded the attached document, squinting at the official print under the dim overhead light. As her eyes moved down the page, her heart began to pound. It was a formal notice of retirement benefits designation. Carol had listed Emily as the secondary beneficiary on her pension disbursement. The document stated that, upon Carol's passing or incapacitation, a portion of her retirement fund, specifically designated as personal discretionary aid, would be allocated to the person named. The amount wasn't massive, but it was more than anything Emily had ever had to her name. $10,000. Emily sat still, her hands trembling. She read the document again, slower this time, making sure she hadn't misread anything. It was real. It was legally filed. Carol had given her a lifeline. The money was not available immediately, it required formal verification of Carol's medical status and submission through a city process. But the Shalta's social worker could help her with that. Emily knew enough now to navigate bureaucracy. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived in Chicago with a backpack and no idea where to sleep. The next morning, she made an appointment with Ms. Chen, the caseworker assigned to the Young Mothers program. They met in the Shalta's office, a small space crammed with filing cabinets and inspirational posters peeling at the corners. "This is unusual," Ms. Chen said after reading the document. "But not impossible. Carol must have submitted the paperwork when she updated her retirement status. If SHS deemed medically incapacitated, and you're the designated beneficiary, the funds are legally yours." "How long does the process take?" Emily asked. "Could be a few weeks. Maybe longer. Depends on how quickly the hospital confirms her condition." "I want to start the paperwork today." Ms. Chen nodded. "Then we'll start it." For the rest of the week, Emily balanced classes and forms. She visited the hospital again, requesting an update on Carol's status and giving consent forms to the staff for the release of information. The nurses knew her by name now. One of them, a tall woman with gray streaks in her hair and soft eyes, gently touched Emily's shoulder before she left. "She talks about you," the nurse said. "Even when SHS not fully lucid. She asks if you were eaten. She asks about the baby. You're her person now." Emily didn't know what to say. Her chest tightened. She just nodded, murmured a thank you, and walked back into the wind. Days blurred together. But in the quiet moments, between lessons on wound care and last night diaper changes, Emily allowed herself to imagine what she might do with the money if it came through. Not luxury. Not escape. But freedom. A small apartment. A safe place for Noah to grow up. Maybe even a used car to cut down on the daily commute. A life with a lock on the door that only she could open. 2 weeks after the document arrived, she got a call. The funds were being released. Ms. Chen met her at the Shalta's administrative office with a check in hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "I've never seen someone make this much progress this quickly," she said. "But don't feel like you have to fix everything overnight. You can take your time." Emily accepted the check with steady hands. "I don't want to take my time," she said softly. "I've waited long enough." That weekend, she began searching for apartments. Not fancy ones. Not even big ones. Just somewhere safe and stable. She found a small studio above a bookstore on the northwest side. The building manager was hesitant at first, but softened when Emily showed proof of the funds and explained her situation. He offered a modest discount for tenants enrolled in full-time education. She moved in 3 days later with nothing but Noah's bassinet, a single suitcase, and a thrifted floor mat. But the moment she slid the key into the door and heard the soft click of the lock turning, something shifted in her. She had a home. The first night in the apartment was quiet. Too quiet, almost. No hallway sounds. No crying babies. No overhead announcements. Just her and Noah, curled up together on a blanket on the floor, surrounded by silence. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering what Carol would think if she knew. Then she whispered aloud, "Thank you." Not just to Carol, but to herself. For holding on. For continuing forward. For refusing to let the world decide who she was allowed to become. Spring came late that year. The snow lingered longer than usual, and the wind still beat through coats well into March. Amalia's studio apartment, though modest, held a comforting warmth that the shelters never had. It smelled of baby lotion and detergent, and every night, as Noah drifted off to sleep in his crib, she sat at her small desk reviewing anatomy charts or folding laundry while the soft hum of the city filled the silence. Her routine had settled into a kind of rhythm: early classes, quick lunches, evenings with Noah, and weekends catching up on study materials. Her professors praised her diligence, often surprised at how consistently she submitted assignments and participated in lab sessions despite her responsibilities. She never mentioned the apartment was furnished with mostly donated items or that dinner was usually a combination of rice and canned vegetables. She didn't need pity. She needed progress. Then, one afternoon in late April, her world shifted again in a way she couldn't have prepared for. She had just completed a long shift for her required clinical hours at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a med-surg facility in the western part of the city. The rotations had begun 2 weeks earlier, an exhausting but exciting phase of the program where students shadowed real nurses and interacted with patients. Emily had requested pediatric assignments whenever possible, drawn instinctively to the youngest and most vulnerable. That day, she was helping with the intrigue in the emergency room, organizing patient files and assisting with triage forms under the supervision of a nurse named Paula. The ER was busy, with a string of minor accidents, fevers, and one diabetic episode that had triggered a brief code. Just as she returned from delivering a clipboard to the front desk, Paula gestured toward her. "Emily, can you check room 4? Middle-aged male, slip and fall. Looks like just a sprained wrist, but we're waiting on the X-ray." "Got it," Emily said, smoothing her scrubs as she walked through the corridor. The curtain was half-drawn, and she pulled it aside gently as she stepped in. "Hi, I'm Emily, ELLB." She stopped. The man seated on the exam table glanced up. His left hand was wrapped in gauze, his face slightly flushed from exertion. His salt-and-pepper hair was shorter than she remembered, and his jawline had softened with age. But there was no mistaking the eyes. Mac Sanders. Her father. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to vanish. The hospital sounds dulled behind the curtain. Emily felt a rush of heat spread from her chest to her ears. She hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years. Not since the day she left home. He didn't recognize her, not immediately. His gaze drifted over her face with polite disinterest, the way people do when they're being held by a stranger. "Wrist hurts like hell," he muttered. "They said the X-ray'll take 20 minutes. Emily stared at him, trying to breathe. "Mr. Sanders," she said slowly, "you took a fall." He squinted, then blinked twice. His expression changed. First to confusion. Then disbelief. "Emily." Her name came out like a question, but one laced with the tremor of certainty. He sat straighter, ignoring the pain in his arm. "What? How?" She took a step back instinctively, as if physical distance might shield her from the weight of the moment. "I'm doing clinical hours," she said, voice controlled. "Part of my nursing program." He was still staring. "You're a nurse?" "In training." He opened his mouth to speak again, then closed it, his hand curling against the fabric of his hospital gown. Neither of them moved. A nurse's voice called from the hallway, snapping Emily back into motion. She looked at the monitor beside the bed, then wrote a quick note on the chart. "ELL, let them know you're ready for the imaging team," she said, turning toward the curtain. "Emily, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. I didn't know you were here," he said, voice lower now. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I didn't think you wanted to," she replied. A long pause. "I was wrong," he said. "We were wrong." Emily said nothing. Her hand clenched around the clipboard. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him if he remembered throwing her out, if he had ever once wondered where Asa had a gun. But she didn't. "Not here. Not now. I have to go," she said finally. And she did. Back in the NASS station, her heart was racing. Paula noticed. "You okay?" Emily nodded. "Yeah. Just tired." She finished the shift mechanically, avoiding room 4. She left the hospital in a daze, pushing Noah's stroller down the cracked sidewalk hours later, unable to stop her hands from trembling. She didn't tell anyone what had happened, not the shelter staff, not her classmates, not even Mariah, who still texted her occasionally. She didn't have the words for it. But 3 days later, she received a message. It came to her student email, likely forwarded through the hospital's patient network. There was no subject line. Just a name, Mac Sanders. The message was short. "Emily. I know you have every reason not to respond. I saw you at the hospital, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Your mother and we never knew what happened to you. We were scared, but mostly we were ashamed. That is no excuse. We failed you. If you're willing to meet, I'd like to explain. I'd like to see my grandson, if that is something you'd allow." Dad. She read it twice, then again, then closed her laptop and walked into the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. That night, Noah was teasing. She ragged him for hours, humming softly, whispering stories until he finally drifted off. But her mind remained restless. She had lived so long without their presence. She had taught herself not to need them. She had buried the versions of herself that longed for a father's comfort or a mother's hand on her cheek. And yet, here they were, trying to return. Trying to insert themselves back into a story they had once written her out of. The next morning, she replied. A meeting might be possible. Not now. Not yet. But someday. Then she turned off her phone, packed Noah's bag, and walked to class, because the future she was building couldn't be post for the past that had suddenly remembered her name. 6 months after she started her clinicals, Emily stood at the podium of a community health event, nervously adjusting the edges of her blouse. The auditorium wasn't full, maybe 30 or 40 people scattered among plastic chairs, but it was the largest crowd she had spoken in front of since she began sharing her story. A faculty member from her program had recommended her to the event organizer, a local nonprofit raising awareness about youth homelessness and single motherhood. When the invitation arrived, Emily nearly declined. But something in her said yes. Something brave. As she began to speak, her voice trembled at first. But she had learned to steady herself, not just in front of people, but in her own thoughts. She talked about the systems she had navigated, the nights she had gone without food so her son wouldn't have to, the classrooms where she arrived late with speed up on her collar, and the shelters where hope was always in short supply. She talked about Noah, now nearly 2 years old, about his laugh, about the way he said, "Mama," when he was tired and curled into her lap. She didn't cry, though the audience did. And when she finished, the applause felt like more than politeness. It felt like affirmation. Afterward, 3 women approached her. One was a high school counselor who asked if Emily would consider speaking at her school. Another handed her a card and said, "You're the reason I came today. My daughter is going through something similar." The third was a journalist with a local online magazine who wanted to feature her story. It all moved quickly from there. The article went live a week later. Titled "From Shelter to Scrubs," the story of a teenage mother who refused to disappear, it was shared more than 10,000 times in the first 48 hours. Emily received messages from people across the country, mothers, students, even former teachers who hadn't known what had happened to her after she left Des Moines. Many wrote to thank her. Others asked for advice. Some simply said, "I see myself in you." The attention was overwhelming, but not unwelcome. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in impact. She began posting short videos on social media, tips for young mothers navigating housing systems, how to apply for scholarships, ways to advocate for yourself during medical visits. The videos were raw, unpolished, often filmed while no one napped. But they resonated. Her follower count climbed slowly, then rapidly. She didn't consider herself an influencer, but people began to treat her like one. Brands reached out. She declined most offers, especially those that felt exploitative or superficial. But when a nonprofit offered to sponsor a community panel where she could speak directly to young women in transition programs, she accepted. She wanted to give back to the spaces that had once saved her. Through it all, she stayed focused on school. The final stretch of her program was demanding. The licensing exam loomed ahead, and every spare minute was spent reviewing practice tests and flashcards. She studied after Noah went to bed, in the early mornings, on her lunch breaks, and during his daycare hours. Her body ached constantly from stress and fatigue, but she had learned how to pace herself, how to find moments of silence in chaos. Graduation day arrived in mid-June. The ceremony was modest, held in the college gymnasium, with folding chairs and a makeshift stage. Emily wore a white nursing uniform and a simple silver pin on her chest. Noah sat in the audience on Maria's lap, wearing a miniature blazer as a shadow found at a thrift store. He clapped randomly, unaware of the significance, but smiling anyway. When Amalia's name was called, she walked across the stage with her back straight and her hands calm. She accepted the certificate, shook the director's hand, and looked out at the crowd. She didn't see her parents. She hadn't invited them. What she did see were Carol's eyes, as she remembered them, soft and proud. She saw Ms. Chen, her old caseworker, seated near the aisle, holding back tears. She saw Noah, pointing toward her with a wide grin. After the ceremony, the faculty hosted a reception in the college courtyard. Tables with lemonade and cookies sat beneath paper banners, and students posed for pictures with family. Emily sat in the grass with Noah and Mariah, eating a cookie and watching the sky turn gold. Mariah lit a cigarette and blew smoke away from the group. "So what now, Florence Nightingale?" Emily left. "State licensing exam next month. Then Percy start applying for jobs." "You're gonna be fine," Mariah said. "You were already made it." Emily didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to Noah, who was trying to eat a dandelion. "If I made it this far," she said. but I am not done. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. She passed the exam on her first try. She applied to 5 hospitals, 3 clinics, and 2 home health agencies. Interviews came quickly. Her story, already public, often preceded her, and the panelists asked not just about her qualifications but about her perspective. Why nursing? One interviewer asked. Because I know what it feels like to be dismissed, she replied. And I know what it means when someone takes you seriously for the first time. She was offered a position at the same hospital where she had done her clinicals, St. Elizabeth's. It wasn't the highest pay offer, but it was the one that felt right. The floor nurse manager who had trained her personally welcomed her aboard. Her first day as a licensed nurse came with little fanfare. She wore fresh scrubs, a name badge clipped to her chest, and a quiet sense of pride. She moved through the hospital corridors with practiced steps, not rushing, not hesitating. Her shifts were long, often stretching past 10 hours. But she never lost sight of the patient behind the chart, the story behind the symptom. She encountered mothers who were scared and alone. Teens who had been abused or abandoned. Infants born into uncertainty. And every time, she listened. Not just with hers but with the part of her that had lived it. Outside of work, her digital presence continued to grow. She launched a small website featuring resources, blog posts, and a downloadable survival guide for teen mothers. She gave workshops at community centers. A local news station asked her to speak during a segment on youth homelessness. She appeared on the panel in a clean white coat, speaking calmly and with conviction. Still, she remained grounded. Noe was growing fast, talking in short sentences, obsessed with trucks and peanut butter sandwiches. He loved the park near their apartment and cried every time they had to leave. Emily kept a photo album, one she updated monthly, documenting every milestone. First words. First steps. First scraped knee. He was the center of her world, the anchor that kept her steady even as the world began to see her differently. One evening, as she read to him from a tattered picture book, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen stopped her breath. Linda Sanders. Her mother. She stared at it for a moment, then let it ring out. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But the past wasn't done with her. And soon, it would come knocking again. The voicemail came 3 days after Emily ignored her mother's first call. It was short and shaky, the voice unfamiliar in its vulnerability. Emily, it is your mother. I know I am probably the last person you want to hear from, and I won't blame you for deleting this before it ends. But we saw your interview on television. You look strong. You sound like someone who has been through more than we ever knew how to handle. Mac and I, your father, we talked. For the first time in years, really talked. And we agreed that we owe you more than silence. We owe you the chance to be heard. If you're willing, we'd like to come visit. Not just to see you, but to meet our grandson. I understand if the answer is no. But we'll be in Chicago next weekend. Just in case. I hope you'll consider it. Emily replayed the message twice. Her hands trembled the first time, her jaw clenched the second. She sat alone at the kitchen table, nowhere asleep in the next room, the soft rumble of the city through the window muffled by the noise inside her own head. She hadn't heard her mother's voice in nearly 6 years. Not since the night she was told to pack her things and never come back. The week that followed was a slow march of indecision. She didn't respond to the message. She didn't delete it either. She went to work, kissed Noah goodbye at daycare each morning, left when he smeared oatmeal across his face, and pretended, outwardly, that everything remained the same. But inside, she was overwhelmed. She confided in no one. Not her co-workers. Not the women from the community center. Not even Mariah. But one night, while folding laundry in the quiet hum of her apartment, she opened her laptop and pulled up her calendar. Next Saturday. She typed out a message. You can come by at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll be home. Don't come early. And don't come with expectations. She sent it to the number her mother had used. The read receipt appeared within seconds. There was no reply. Saturday arrived with the grey chill of early autumn. Emily woke early, dressed Noah in his favorite blue sweater, and made pancakes that neither of them ate much of. She vacuumed the already clean carpet, wiped the surfaces twice, then sat at the edge of the couch watching the clock tick slowly toward 3. At exactly 2:58 there was a knock. She opened the door slowly. Mac and Linda Sanders stood in the hallway, older than she remembered. Her mother's once auburn hair had faded to a muted gray, tied back in a low knot. Her father's posture was less rigid, his face marked by lines that hadn't been there the last time they saw each other. He held his head in his hands, awkwardly twisting it as if unsure whether to wear it or drop it entirely. "Hi," Emily said, her voice measured. Linda stepped forward fast. "Hi," she said softly. "You look well." Emily stepped aside. "Come in." They entered the apartment cautiously, eyes drifting over the space. The furniture was modest, but the apartment was spotless. A framed certificate from her nursing program hung above the couch. On the adjacent wall, photos of Noah, laughing, crawling, playing, were pinned on a string of fairy lights. Mac looked at them longer than he should have. Noah peeked out from the hallway, his eyes wide. He clutched a toy truck in one hand and studied the strangers silently. Linda crouched a little, her voice trembling. "Is this?" Emily nodded. "Noah." Mac took a slow step forward. He is beautiful." Noah stayed where he was, looking up at Emily for reassurance. "It is okay," she said softly. "They're visitors." He stepped out hesitantly, inching closer to Linda, who now knelt fully, smiling gently. "I am your grandmother," she said. If that is okay to say." Noah looked at her, then at his mother, then walked over and handed her the truck. Linda let out a choked laugh and took it gently. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emily led them to the couch. They sat stiffly, uncertain how to begin. "We didn't come to talk about the past," Linda said after a moment. "But we'll answer anything you want to ask," Mac added quickly. Emily sat across from them, Noah now settled beside her playing quietly with a puzzle. "I don't want a recap," she said calmly. "I lived it. I want to know why. Not what happened. Why it happened." The room fell into a long silence. Linda folded her hands in her lap. "Because we were afraid. Afraid of judgment, of what people would say. Afraid of failing as parents. We were raised to believe certain sins were unforgivable." Mac's jaw tightened. "And we thought we were saving you from shame. We thought if we were harsh, you'd see the error. But all we did was abandon you." Emily didn't flinch. "You did more than abandon me. You erased me. Linda nodded slowly, her eyes misting. We did. Mac looked at the floor. There's not a day that goes by I don't regret it. Emily looked at her son, who was now focused on placing pieces into their correct shapes. I had him alone. No help. I gave birth in a hospital surrounded by strangers. I worked for everything you see here, this apartment, my job, my degree. I did it without you. And I won't pretend that you're owed a place in our lives just because you're ready now. Linda leaned forward. We don't think we're owed anything, Emily. We want to know you again. Know him. If that is something you can allow. Amalia's hands were still in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't tremble. You can't undo what happened, she said. And I am not the girl you left behind. I changed. I am stronger. Not because of you, but in spite of you. If we move forward, it is on my terms. Mac nodded. Understood. Linda wiped her cheek. Whatever you decide, we'll respect it. For the next hour, the conversation softened. They asked about Noah's favorite toys, his routines, the daycare he attended. Emily answered only what she was comfortable with. She didn't share photos beyond the ones on the wall. She didn't offer hugs or warmth she didn't feel. But she also didn't close the door. When they stood to leave, Linda bent down and kissed the top of Noah's head. He didn't resist. Mac offered a handshake to Emily, but she only nodded. They stepped into the hallway quietly. Before the door closed, Linda turned back. We're staying at a hotel near the park. If you'd ever like to talk again, we'll be here through Thursday. Emily didn't promise anything. She just closed the door gently. That night, as Noah slept beside her, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her heart wasn't full. It wasn't empty either. Something in between. She didn't know if forgiveness was coming. But something had shifted. The door wasn't wide open. But it was no longer shut. The morning after the visit from her parents, Emily didn't speak of it to anyone. Not at work, not at daycare pickup, not even to herself. The encounter remained suspended in her chest like a weight that hadn't yet decided if it would settle or lift. She returned to routine. Noah went back to daycare, clutching his favorite plush frog, and Emily resumed her long shifts at the hospital, managing patient charts, comforting anxious families, and moving from room to room with practiced grace. Her co-workers often praised her for her calm under pressure, but none of them saw the undercurrent of turbulence that now followed her home every evening. It wasn't that she regretted letting them in, it was that she didn't know what to do with the silence that came after. Mac and Linda hadn't contacted her again. Not by phone, not by message. Whether it was a show of respect or caution, she couldn't tell. She found herself watching for them whenever she walked through the park or stopped by the corner store. A small part of her expected to turn and see them across the street, but they never appeared. She was grateful for that, and yet their absence after their presence felt louder than before. It was Noah who finally broke the tension. On a crisp Sunday afternoon, she took him to the park near their building. He was just over 2 years old now, running clumsily in sneakers a size too big, yelling joyfully at pigeons and squealing when they scattered. Emily sat on a bench near the jungle gym, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and flipping through a study guide she had already memorized twice. "Mama," Noe shouted, pointing at a boy across the sandbox. That's a big truck. She smiled and nodded. It is. Do you want to ask if you can play? Noe trotted over to the boy and began negotiating in the way toddlers do, with big eyes and few words. The boy's grandmother, seated nearby, gave Emily a friendly nod. She recognized her vaguely as a neighbor from down the street. "Yuri the nurse from the news?" the woman asked, leaning over. Emily nodded slowly. "That's me. Yuri doing good things. Important things. My daughter saw you speak at the shelter downtown. Said it gave her courage." Emily was surprised. "Thank you. That means a lot," they said quietly as the children played. After a while, the woman said, "You know, that little bookstore on 8th is for sale. My son-in-law manages the property. Been empty since spring." Emily looked up, curious. "The one with the blue awning?" "That is the one. Place has 2 units upstairs. Small but livable. A bit of work, but solid bones." Emily nodded but didn't respond. She wasn't in the position to consider something like that, not now. Her schedule was full, her income just enough to survive with a little left over for emergencies. Owning anything felt like an illusion reserved for people with a different kind of life. But later that night, she couldn't shake the thought. She pulled up the property online. The price was modest for the area, especially considering it included living space. It had been listed for months with no buyers. There was an email attached for inquiries. She closed the browser. The next day, during her lunch break, she opened it again. She wrote a message. 2 days later, she stood inside the empty bookstore, Noe on her hip, a property manager explaining the history of the building. It had once been a community favorite, used books, poetry readings, after-school programs. The back room still had a faded chalkboard with remnants of old schedules. The 2 apartments upstairs were tight but functional, with sturdy windows and hardwood floors dulled by years of wear. "It is zoned for live-work use," the manager explained. "You could rent out the top unit or keep both. Up to you." Emily nodded absently, her eyes drifting across the dusty bookshelves. She could see it, not just the bookstore, but something more. A community space. A resource hub. A place where young mothers could gather, swap clothes, share advice, and feel safe. But she didn't have the money. Not enough. That night, after putting Noe to bed, she opened the box of papers she kept in the closet. She found the letter from Carol. The pension funds were gone, used wisely and sparingly, but gone nonetheless. She ran her fingers over the ink as if it could give her an answer. And then, she remembered the messages. She opened Have.T's inbox. There were dozens, some from people offering support, others asking for guidance. But one subject line stood out: "Let me help you build something." She clicked. The message was from a woman named Rebecca Angie, a founder of a Chicago-based women's advocacy nonprofit. She had seen Amalia's interview, followed her social media, and wanted to collaborate. "If you ever need a partner to bring your ideas to life," it read, "we'd be honored." Emily responded that night. The conversation unfolded quickly. They met at a coffee shop the following week, and Emily presented her idea: have bookstore, have community support space. A place for access, education, and connection. Rebecca listened without interrupting, then slid a notepad across the table with a name written on it. Meet with her, she said. SHS our grant coordinator. 3 weeks later, Emily received confirmation that her proposal had been accepted for funding. It wouldn't cover everything, but it was enough for a down payment on the property and seed money to begin renovations. She signed the papers in early December. The kiss felt heavy in her palm. The first few months were a blur of paint, repair, and planning. Volunteers from the nonprofit helped with the shelves. Local artists donated signage. Former shelter residents offered to lead workshops on parenting, budgeting, and healthcare access. She named the space Haven. The bookstore occupied the front. Used titles. Parenting guides. Children's stories. A small reading corner with beanbags and a worn-out carpet donated by a local school. The back became a rotating resource room, diaper drives, gently used clothing swaps, community board meetings. The upstairs apartment became her home. She moved out of her studio quietly, with Maria's help, and never looked back. On the day of the grand opening, a line wrapped around the block. The local news came. So did mothers with strollers, teenagers with questions, and volunteers with trays of baked goods. No adult around, waving to everyone, proudly telling strangers, "This is Mama's library." That afternoon, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low, a familiar voice called her name. She turned. Linda and Mac stood at the edge of the sidewalk. Emily didn't smile. But she didn't walk away. Mac took a slow step forward. "We saw the flyer. Thought we'd stop by." Linda looked around, eyes wide. "It is beautiful." Emily crossed her arms. "It is not a church. No one here is pretending they have all the answers." Linda lowered her gaze. "We're not here to preach. We just wanted to see what you were built," Mac added. "And say we're proud of you. Whether you let us in again or not." Emily didn't respond right away. She looked behind her at the chalkboard wall covered in messages of hope, the worn books on the shelves, and the table where Noah now sat coloring between two young mothers as they met at a shelter years ago. This was hers. All of it. She looked back at her parents, and for the first time, her voice was steady and clear. "You can come in." Not because she had forgotten. Not because they had earned it. But because she had nothing to prove anymore. She had already come home. The inside of Haven was warm, the faint scent of cinnamon and aged paper lingering in the air. Emily led her parents toward the back room where a few volunteers were folding blankets and organizing donations into bins. Mac and Linda walked slowly, looking around without speaking, their expressions unreadable. It wasn't a shame exactly, but something in between. Something quieter. Something heavier. Emily kept her distance as she gestured toward the wall behind the community table, where hand-drawn flyers advertised upcoming workshops. One read, "Understanding Tenant Rights, next Saturday at 2. Another, "Postpartum Depression is Real, Let's Talk." Linda's eyes paused on one flyer. "Resume writing for mothers re-entering the workforce." She turned to Emily. "You're helping people get their lives back." Emily shrugged. "I'm helping them not lose it in the first place." Mac had been silent since stepping through the door. He walked slowly along the bookshelf nearest the register, trailing his fingers across the spines of weathered paperbacks. When he turned to face Emily, there was a tightness in his jaw, but his voice was softer than she remembered. "Do you ever think about coming back?" he asked. Emily narrowed her gaze. To Des Moines. He nodded. To the church. To us. We were changed. Emily crossed her arms. I didn't leave because I hated your church. I left because your church hated me the moment I stopped being what you wanted. We were scared, Mac said, echoing the same words Linda had spoken during their first visit. We thought we were protecting you. We didn't understand. You didn't try to, Emily said quietly. You shut the door before I could even explain. Linda stepped in, voice shaky. We were lived with that. Every day. We were on. We still are. But we're trying now. We want to be part of Noah's life. If you'll let us. Emily didn't respond immediately. She looked over to where Noah was now playing with alphabet blocks under a window, the late afternoon sun catching his curls like a halo. She had protected him from so much rejection, instability, confusion. Now, for the first time, she wondered if she was strong enough to protect him from forgiveness, too. I didn't ask you to come back, she said. We know, Mac replied. But we're here anyway. Not because it is convenient. Because it is necessary. She looked at him sharply. For whom? That stopped him. He blinked slowly and sat down in one of the wooden chairs at the center table. It creaked under his weight. For me, he said at last. Emily remained standing, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had played this scene in her mind 1,000 times, confronting them, demanding answers, walking away with the last word. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. You said I ruined your name, she said. You told me I had humiliated you. I was wrong, Mac said. But by the time I realized it, I didn't know how to reach you. And maybe I didn't deserve to. You didn't, Emily replied. Not then. Linda wiped at her eyes. And now? Emily looked at her mother, this older, softer woman who bore so little resemblance to the one who had stood in the kitchen and handed her a Bible as she packed a single backpack. She wondered if this woman remembered the exact words Esha said that night. Emily remembered every one. You can be in his life, she said at last. But on my terms. I don't want him confused. I don't want him made to feel like your love depends on obedience or perfection. Never again, Linda whispered. Mac stood and walked over to Noah, who was stacking blocks into a wobbly tower. He knelt slowly, watching the boy work. May I? He asked gently. Noah looked at Emily, and she nodded. Mac handed him another block. That goes here, Noah said proudly, placing it on top. Mac smiled. You're right. Emily turned away before her face gave too much away. She wasn't ready to trust it. Not yet. Maybe not ever fully. But for now, she could allow the moment. The visit ended without drama. They left quietly, thanking her again, promising to respect whatever boundaries she set. Emily didn't watch them go. She stayed by the window, hands resting on the back of a chair, had still beaten in a rhythm she hadn't yet learned to name. Later that night, long after Haven had closed and Noah had drifted to sleep in the upstairs apartment, Emily sat alone in the reading corner, sipping tea that had gone cold. Her phone buzzed beside her on the cushion. A new message from Mariah. So the bookstore's Instagram. Looks amazing. Proud of you. Call me sometime, loser. Emily smiled faintly and replied, will do. If got updates. She didn't mention the visit. She wasn't ready to tell that part of the story yet. She wasn't even sure how it ended. But the confrontation, once feared, had not destroyed her. It hadn't even cracked her. Instead, it had revealed something unexpected. She no longer needed their acceptance to validate what she had built. She had chosen her life, every painful, beautiful part of it. And nothing would take that away. Emily was sitting in the cozy back room of Haven, a small stack of nursing journals beside her and Noah playing quietly with wooden blocks on the floor. The afternoon light filtered softly through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn rug. It had been a busy day of workshops, community meetings, and paperwork, and for once, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. Noah crawled over to her, holding a colorful drawing he'd just finished, a scribbled family portrait with stick figures and a bright sun hovering above. "Mama," he said, eyes wide, "look. Us." Emily smiled, reaching to take the paper. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." He beamed proudly and then surprised her by climbing into her lap, wrapping small arms around her neck. They stayed like that for a while, the kind of quiet connection that filled the gaps between words. It was rare and precious. Later that evening, as she prepared dinner in their small kitchen, Amalia's phone buzzed. A message from Mac. "Can we talk? Noah wants to see us. He has something to say." Emily frowned. It was unusual for Mac to initiate contact directly, especially involving Noah. She called him instead. "Emily," Mac's voice was hesitant. "I don't want to overstep, but Noah asked me to call. He has been talking about you and the visits. He wants to share something." Emily exhaled slowly. "Okay. What does he want to say?" "I thought it'd be better if you heard it from him," Mac replied. "Maybe we could meet at the park tomorrow." Emily paused, weighing the request. She hadn't anticipated this. Noah was only 3 years old, still so young, yet something in her gut told her this moment mattered. "All right," she said softly. 1 hour. At the park. The next afternoon, the sun was low, golden hues casting worms over the swings and slides. Emily arrived early, carrying Noah's favorite blanket and a small bag of snacks. Mac and Linda were already there, standing awkwardly near the bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. Noah ran toward them, arms outstretched, laughter ringing out pure and unburdened. Emily followed, her steps cautious. Mac smiled, bending to greet his grandson. Linda's eyes glistened with tears as she watched the child who had become the center of their fractured world. Once Noah was settled on the bench between them, he looked up at Emily with a serious expression. "I want to tell them, Mama," he said. Amalia's heart skipped. "Tell us what, sweetie." He drew a breath, his small hands gripping the bench's edge. "About how you're strong." Mac and Linda exchanged a glance. Emily nodded. "Go on." Noah looked at his grandparents, then back at his mother. "You told me stories," he began in halting words, "of when you had to be brave all alone. How you took care of me when no one else could. You're my hero." Mac's face softened, tears brimming. Linda reached for Noah's hand. Emily swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the child's innocent wisdom and unexpected insight. "Noah," she said, voice sick, "that means more than you know." Noah smiled, then looked thoughtfully at Mac and Linda. "You weren't here," he said plainly. but I don't hate you. I just want to know who you are. Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying. Linda's tears spilled freely. Mac's jaw trembled. Emily put an arm around Noah, drawing him close. "That's a very grown-up thing to say," she whispered. Mac looked up, voice shaky. He is wise beyond his years. "You've done an amazing job." Amalia's eyes burned with emotion. "He learned from the best." Mac swallowed hard, nodding. "We'll do better. For him." Noah leaned into Emily, eyes bright with trust. The afternoon stretched on, filled with soft conversations and tentative smiles. The wounds of the past didn't disappear, but for the first time, there was space for healing, not just between Emily and her parents, but between generations. That night, Emily sat by Noah's bedside after tucking him in, watching his chest rise and fall in slow rhythm. She whispered, "Thank you, my love, for reminding me what really matters." Noah smiled in his sleep. Emily knew that this truth, spoken so simply by a child, was the strongest foundation she could ever build on. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Emily found the envelope tucked inside the main slot of Havana's front door. The sky was thick with clouds, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windowpane mingled with the faint chatter of early visitors arriving for the day's workshops. She nearly missed the small cream-colored envelope, almost blending in with the pile of flyers and bills. She picked it up cautiously and slipped inside, Noah toddling behind her with his usual curiosity. "Mail, Mama?" he asked, climbing onto the chair beside her. Emily sat at the counter, carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in familiar, shaky handwriting. She recognized it immediately. Mac's. "Dear Emily, I've carried this letter in my heart for years, but never found the courage to write it. Maybe because words feel too small, too weak compared to the pain I caused. I was a coward. I was blinded by fear and pride. When you needed us most, we abandoned you. I told myself it was for your own good, but that was just self-deception. I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask for it. But I wanted you to know, truly know, that I regret what I did every single day. I see the woman you have become. I am proud of you, even if I cannot say it aloud. I hope one day we can talk. Not as father and daughter bound by duty, but as two flawed people trying to find peace. Mac." Emily read the letter twice. The first time, the words blurred as tears welled up and threatened to spill. The second time, she absorbed the weight of his honesty. The confession wasn't a plea. It was a beginning, a fragile opening in a wall that had guarded years of silence. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Are you sad, Mama?" She wiped her eyes and smiled gently. "No, love. Sometimes people say sorry when they realize what they've lost. That is a good thing." He nodded, as if understanding far more than his years should allow. Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box beneath the counter, where she kept other mementos of her journey, notes from Carol, photos from nursing school, cards from friends made along the way. The letter changed something inside her. It didn't erase the past, nor did it promise a perfect future. But it softened the edges of old wounds. That afternoon, she sat with Linda and Mac in the back room of Haven. The small space was warm, lit softly by a table lamp and the low hum of conversations drifting from the main room. Noah played quietly nearby, building a tower of blocks. Mac cleared his throat. "I wanted to read this to you in person," he said, voice sick with emotion. "But I didn't know if I could." Emily looked at him, steady. "I read it." He nodded. "Thank you." Linda reached for his hand. "We've been living with silence too long. It is time to speak honestly." Emily exhaled slowly. "Then speak." They spent the next hour unraveling memories neither wanted to face alone. Linda spoke of her fears, how their strict beliefs had blinded them to Amalia's reality. Mac admitted his shame had turned into anger, a defense mechanism that pushed her away instead of pulling her closer. "I was angry at the situation," he said. "But mostly, I was angry at myself for not being the father you needed." Emily listened, not with forgiveness yet, but with understanding. The walls as a shadow built weren't going to crumble overnight, but they were cracking. When the conversation waned, Linda looked at her daughter, eyes glistening. "We want to be better. Not just for us, but for you and Noe." Emily nodded. "Actions speak louder than words." They agreed on small steps, a weekly visit, no pressure, just presence. They would come to Haven, help with the workshops, learn about Noe's life from her perspective. The next weeks brought tentative moments. Mac showed up one Saturday morning, hesitant but eager, helping organize donated clothes. Linda baked cookies for a holiday gathering, laughing shyly when Noe insisted on helping by throwing flour in the air. Emily watched, surprised by how much the effort meant, not just to her parents, but to herself. She found herself softening, allowing glimpses of the family she once hoped for, mixed with the woman she had become. One evening, as Noe slept, Emily sat on the porch steps of Haven, scrolling through messages from mothers who found hope in her story. A notification popped up, a news alert about a local award for community service. She paused. The nomination was anonymous, but she suspected it was from someone who believed in second chances. She smiled, thinking of Mac's letter. Sometimes, the hardest apologies carry the greatest power. And sometimes, forgiveness is the bravest step forward. The auditorium was bathed in soft, golden light, a crowd gathered in anticipation. Family, friends, community members, and local supporters filled the rows of folding chairs. The ceremony was modest but heartfelt, a celebration of the graduating class from the city university where Noe, now 19, was about to receive his baccalaureate degree in engineering. Emily sat near the front, her heart swollen with pride. Her parents, Mac and Linda, sat quietly at the back, careful to remain unobtrusive but present. The years had done their work, softening past wounds and teaching new lessons in humility and grace. Yet, the history between them lingered, a silent thread woven through the room. Noe stepped onto the stage, dressed in his cap and gown, his tall frame both confident and slightly awkward. As the announcer called his name, the room erupted in applause. He paused at the podium, adjusting the microphone, before beginning his speech. "I want to thank everyone who helped me get here," he began, voice steady and clear. "Especially my mom, Emily Sanders. You're the reason I am standing here today." The crowd shifted, turning to look at her. Amalia's throat tightened, tears prickling her eyes. "No one here knows the full story," Noe continued, "but I do. I know about the hard nights, the sacrifices, the moments when giving up seemed easier. I know how she fought to give me a better life, even when it meant facing the world alone." He paused, scanning the audience until his gaze settled on the back row. "To my grandparents, Mac and Linda, I want to say thank you for coming today. I am proud to have family, even if the road was difficult. I learned to judge people by their actions, not just their words. And I hope we can keep building from here. The applause that followed was loud and genuine. Emily looked at her parents, Mac's eyes glistened with tears, Linda's lips pressed into a proud smile. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had endured together. After the ceremony, the crowd filtered out into the cool evening air. Emily and Noe embraced tightly, laughter and tears mingling as they celebrated this milestone. Mac approached cautiously. "Congratulations, Noe," he said, voice choked with emotion. "You were made us proud." Linda nodded, turning to Emily. "You were raised a remarkable son." Emily met their eyes, steady now, stronger. "Thank you," she said softly. "For being here." Mac nodded. "This is just the beginning." Over the following months, Haven continued to thrive. The community center expanded its reach, hosting more programs, and becoming a beacon of hope for countless families. Emily balanced her nursing career with her role as founder and advocate, her story inspiring many. Her parents grew into their roles as grandparents, attending school events, volunteering occasionally, and learning to listen more than they spoke. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer dictated the future. One afternoon, Emily sat with Noe and his partner in the bookstore's reading nook, watching as a group of children gathered around for story time. The space buzzed with warmth and laughter, a living testament to resilience and new beginnings. She smiled, feeling the quiet peace of a life rebuilt. Noe caught her eye and grinned. "We did it, Mama." "Yes," she replied, "we did. Because sometimes, the greatest shock isn't in what we see, but in the strength we find when we finally understand."